There are some changes appearing on the horizon according to how the NCAA is going to operate in the future. How will that affect BYU Athletics and BYU football in particular? Well, both negatively and positively. We'll talk about it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, the motto is your team every day, and we are your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you to the events you want to go to. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And don't mind the rundown. I decided to switch it, right as I push record. But alas, we'll flip the top two topics. And if that means for those of you watching on YouTube, we have a little graphic that we throw up on the overlay. But let's talk about changes that are appearing on the horizon for NCAA athletics, and just BYU is going to be affected by these. We've talked about them not that long ago. Remember, late last week, we talked about the proposals of settling a lawsuit that could require all power level programs, including BYU, to potentially have to pay up to $22 million in revenue sharing with their athletes. Well, more proposals have come out of those negotiations, according to what Yahoo Sports is reporting. And they're saying that under a proposed new athlete compensation model, power conference leaders are considering significantly reducing football rosters, potentially moving from a roster of more than 115 athletes. I think currently the cap is 125, something like that, to as few as 85 to 95 players. In theory, what they are doing is they are going to cut this down to essentially what the current scholarship limit is in college football. At the FBS level, it is 85 scholarships. They might be cutting it down to that, all but ensuring that walk-ons are a thing of the past, it appears, for football programs. That would be a negative in my mind for the BYU football program, because think of some of the great walk-ons in BYU history that have gone on to be absolute legends in their own right. Tyler Algier, Dax Milne. I just go down the list and name a number of guys in the very recent past who came in as walk-ons and have been big-time contributors for the BYU football program. Essentially whacking that and getting rid of it, I think, would be a bad deal. But the reason why this is happening, the concept circulated across administrative meetings over the last week, is part of what could be a sweeping and historic transformation of the industry in coming months, all of it rooted in the settlement agreement of various antitrust lawsuits, which could feature as much as $2.9 billion in back damages for former players, a future revenue sharing model that, like I said, could cost BYU and other power programs up to $22 million in revenue sharing annually, and then also an overhaul of how the NCAA scholarship and roster structure comes about. Now, that is the negative, seeing potentially a reduction of the overall roster size for BYU football, because as I mentioned, BYU has thrived, and Kalani Sitake has been unabashed in saying that the walk-on program at BYU has been absolutely critical to any and all success they have had with him. And you can go back through the history of BYU football. Walk-ons are a huge part of the story for the Cougars. Now, the positive goes to more of the overall athletic department, because under this proposal, an overshadowed but impactful piece, I'm reading this from Yahoo once again, of the proposed new model is the addition of roster limits by sport and the expansion of scholarships. So what does that mean? Well, currently, as they mentioned, the NCAA permits schools to distribute 11.7 scholarships across a baseball roster that is capped at 32 players. Under the new potential model, a school could, if it chooses, distribute full scholarships across all 32 of those spots to their baseball program. So therefore, BYU could see a reduction for the football program, but could expand in other venues. They could obviously give full ride scholarships across the board to their baseball program. They could expand that out for any program they so desired. It's a very interesting model that's being proposed here. So that's why I mentioned in the open of today's show, there's both positives and negatives, because currently in the reduction of 120 person football roster by as many as 35 spots, that would all eliminate all walk-on positions at most power schools. But here's the other thing. most power schools, you don't necessarily always have a capped number of 85 scholarship players. So in theory, there could be a few walk-ons there, but you'd be losing a large chunk of what's been a roster. But they do say here it's because the putting a football roster limit is in an effort to, one, reduce expenses amid the rising costs of athlete revenue sharing. Like I said, potentially $22 million annually for BYU in the future. They're saying an estimate between $17 and $22 million. And then also instill a cost containment concept to limit a school's scholarship distribution. Now, the interesting part about this, and I will give massive credit to Casey Lundquist over at Cougs Daily. He wrote a really, really fascinating piece. Now, some of you may know this, but the Department of Education and the United States government puts out reports annually, and they're usually 2 to 3 years behind with regards to athletic departments. And BYU is not accepted from these reports. They put out the overall money that athletic departments are generating versus spending. And BYU, the most recent one that have come out for 2021. And as Casey points out in this, BYU in 2021, if you essentially lay them out against the rest of the the newly formed Big 12 conference, BYU in 2021 was 10th in the conference, making $106.4 million. The caveat with this is in 2021, remember, BYU was still an independent football program, and the most gaudy numbers, the most ambitious numbers of BYU's TV revenue share that they earned from ESPN during that era of independence was what, $10 million? As Casey points out, you add in the current distribution and the projected future distribution of just alone the media rights deals for the Big 12, BYU jumps into the top half of the conference in those projections in 2025, as he projects here $137.1 million, outclassing Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, UCF, and there is the University of Utah at number 11, $123.4 million. Folks, BYU has been generating incredible revenue. And some of you may be saying, well, Jake, how can you project that? Well, here's the deal. And Casey, I'll give him credit on this. He also mentioned this. In 2010, BYU's overall revenue in athletics in 2010, $45.5 million. Just 11 years later, they more than doubled that number. And it's only going to go up. There's no if, and, or but about it. So BYU is in a very good financial position. Should they have to spend $22 million on revenue sharing, BYU is going to be able to absorb that, I think, easier than other athletic departments and schools will be able to, because remember, Utah, Arizona State, a lot of these programs have been in the Power 5 level, and they've had these massive checks of the TV distribution as part of their calculus. BYU hasn't had that, folks. So they can earmark essentially, hey, we're going to need $22 million potentially here for revenue sharing. The story from Yahoo Sports also mentions that there are multiple administrators saying they're currently projecting needing to add $8 to $10 million into their budgets in the future if they do expand these rosters and the overall scholarships allotted to these football programs. And not football programs, I'm talking about athletic department programs across the board. So that's what, 30 million conservatively you've got to be able to come up with here for your BYU. Well, the way BYU's been operating, and I'll reiterate it once again, BYU Athletics is not subsidized by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I don't mean to burst anybody's bubble, but the LDS Church is not the trust fund daddy for BYU Athletics. BYU Athletics has to eat what it kills, and what that means is they can spend the money that they generate. They're coming into more money than they ever have before. And yes, they are paying more money than they ever have before to staffs. Speaking of Kevin Young's staff on the BYU basketball front, and that's a great thing. But at the same time, the projections are BYU is going to be having more money than ever. I believe that Tom Holmoe and the Brain Trust down there in Provo, led by University leadership, Shane Reese, they will be projecting ahead, and Keith Vorkink, etc. And they will have this earmarked to be able to absorb any and all potential impacts of this. And then, like I said, the nice part is, if you're a BYU fan, you should feel confident that BYU, they very easily can find themselves top half of the conference in revenue annually very quickly. And oh, by the way, as they continue to generate new revenue streams, that pushes BYU even higher. And yes, they can absorb, I believe, the hits that are going to come. It seems like it's a matter of if not when this a lawsuit is settled and you have to pay out for whatever the damage is, and also having to pay out annually under a new agreement. I think BYU, honestly, might be one of the best, if not the best positioned athletic department in the Big 12 and maybe in all of power level football. I guess you could also include the other newcomers who joined the Big 12 last year because they didn't necessarily have massive distribution numbers as well. UCF, Houston, and Cincinnati. But their projections from 2021 had them near the bottom, if I recall correctly, in terms of their overall payouts. I'll scroll up on this real quick. Let's see. We had UCF with 88.2 million, Houston 84 million, and Cincinnati 77.4 million. So they were the lowest three of the current 16-team Big 12 in 2021. So in theory, with their projections, if they're smart, obviously doing their bookkeeping, they could come out ahead as compared to some of these other ones who may be a little more bootstrapped when it comes to this. So I'm very interested to see where it all goes, but fascinating stuff. And I think the future of college athletics, it's changing, and it's changing quick. So get ready for it. And I think BYU, if they're smart about this, they could find themselves in a very, very positive leverage type position if they go about this the right way. And the way BYU has operated in the past, I've got no problem saying that I believe they absolutely will handle it the way that I anticipate them to be handling it. All right. Coming up next, we're going to talk about potentially a major addition to the BYU football roster. We've talked about the fact they've been looking to add 1 to 2 offensive linemen. They've already added one, the interior guy. They wanted to add an offensive tackle, and they may have found just that guy, and he was across the Rockies on the Front Range last season. We'll talk about Isaiah Jatta coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you, my friends, to get you out to whatever you're looking for. But if you are looking forward to the NBA playoffs, and I'm telling you, I'm watching them because it's part of my job in radio. The best part is I'd love to be able to go into the NBA playoffs. I've been to many playoff games in Salt Lake City, the Delta Center, watching the Utah Jazz. Cannot wait for the Jazz to get back there one day. But if you're looking to go, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. And the best part is prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. Think about that, my friends. They want to help you guys out, make it as simple as possible. They got killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, all in an easy to use app. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your NBA tickets and gets you to the event or the events you're looking to go to. It doesn't have to be sports. It can be theater, comedy, music events, whatever you're looking for. Game Time's got the options for you guys. So take the guesswork once again out of buying your NBA or other tickets with our friends at Game Time. Download Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Once again, terms apply. Create that account. Redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That spells out Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys, are you sick of watching Fox Sports or ESPN and having to turn on the volume on with all the shouting going on from the talking heads on those networks? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming going on the other networks. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Like this podcast, of course, it is your team every day. All right. Isaiah Jatta is a name that some of you may be familiar with, but he recently entered the NCAA Transfer Portal, and he's one of the bigger names that still remains as kind of a quote-unquote free agent in the transfer portal. 6'6", 300-pound offensive tackle from the University of Colorado, and he announced last night that BYU has offered him. I think this is a fantastic offer for the BYU football program because Isaiah Jatta is already familiar with Utah. Well, how is he familiar with Utah, Jake? I'm glad you asked. He spent 2 seasons playing for Zach Erickson down at Snow College before spending last season with Colorado and Coach Prime. He played in 11 games a year ago, starting just 1. He was projected actually to be more of an impact player for Colorado, but it never really came to fruition. But I've talked about this. The BYU wanted to bring 1 to 2 offensive linemen, and the whole thought process was to get one on the interior, and they accomplished that earlier this week, and then to get an offensive tackle on the exterior to push both Braden Keim and Caleb Etienne, who are currently projected as your starting bookend tackles. Well, I think Isaiah Jatta has got the capability of being that guy. Like I said, 6'6", 300 pounds. He's got the measurables to fit the bill as an offensive tackle for BYU. He only has 1 year of eligibility based on how I understand it, because he's played 2 years at junior college, the 1 year at Colorado. So essentially he would come in with 2 years to play 1. He's got a redshirt year in the mix there. But I think this would be a very savvy pickup for BYU if Isaiah feels feels like Provo is the move for him. I don't necessarily say that he's going to come in and start right away. I think it'd be hard pressed to do that because the familiarity, the guy like Braden Keim, who spent literally years in this program, and also a guy like Caleb Etienne having over a year at this point, working out with BYU and knowing this offense, that probably give them the leg up going into training camp. But the one thing you want is you want competition. And TJ Woods has been unabashed in the media availabilities, in the interviews I've heard from him, about saying that he wants a competition at all levels, and every coach wants that. I think Isaiah Jatta would come in and absolutely push for playing time and would really make BYU's other offensive linemen earn what they're looking to get. He's a kid from Helix High School in San Diego, California. Very much a guy I think that would fit the bill for BYU. If I recall correctly, and I may be wrong on this, I probably should ask Jeff Hansen from Cougar Sports Insider about this, but he was a guy that was pretty highly projected coming out of Snow College, and I do believe at that time BYU did have interest in him. 3-star prospect at junior college. He was listed as the number 9 JUCO transfer overall, so a top 10 JUCO transfer, number 3 offensive tackle, and the top JUCO player out of California. So very much a guy that was an impact type player and was expected to come in and make, I think, a bigger imprint for Colorado. For whatever reason, he decided that playing for Coach Prime was not in his best interest moving forward, and BYU may be the beneficiary of this. So just to reiterate, I don't think that Jatta is a guy that's like the mark it down, put it in ink. If he picks BYU, he's going to start. Could he do that? Absolutely. Maybe he comes in BYU, the offense that they run and the environment around BYU versus the reality show that is Colorado, because it's legitimately a reality show. Any of you who've watched what Coach Prime's doing is he's got a son producing a reality program around that program quite literally every day. And there have been a number of players who have left CU Boulder recently and have said that I'm sick of being in the so-called rat race and being on camera all the time. They just want to play football. Well, that could be the thing that Isaiah Jatta might be looking for, and that could be the move for BYU. Kalani Sitake talks all the time about the BYU football program being a family. He wants to be a place that guys can be both embraced in how they go about their business playing football, but at the same time, not have to deal with a lot of the other off-the-field issues that are inherent to college athletics and college football in particular at other universities. And I don't mean to come off as preachy and saying that BYU is unique, but it is. It absolutely is a unique place. Anybody who tells you otherwise, they're lying to you. BYU is a unique place. I grew up around the university. I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to attend the university. There's not a chance in the world at this point in my life. If I were 20 years old, I probably wouldn't get into BYU at this point, but I'm lucky enough to have gone through that university. I understand how it works in the athletic department, and especially in the BYU football program. And the whole idea that Kalani has tried to establish, the culture he's tried to establish in Provo, is that it's a family environment. These guys fight for one another. It's not, like I said, it's not scripted. It's not a reality TV show that it feels like in many respects Colorado is. They're essentially trying to promote themselves and try and cash in on it. That's not BYU style. And I think that it could be the move that Isaiah Jatta is just looking for. He wants to play ball. He wants to focus on what he's doing on the gridiron. Well, that's exactly what BYU can offer. So we'll see what happens here. I like the fit. I like the measurables. I think that he's got the chops, having played at Snow College, and his understanding. If he's been at school at Ephraim, well, Provo's going to look like a freaking big city as compared to Ephraim, Utah. And it's nothing against Ephraim. I love going to Ephraim. I have 3 siblings who attended school at Snow College, and it's a unique place, but Provo could be the right fit for Isaiah if he decides that's where he wants to move. And we'll see how it goes. I think this would be a pretty savvy idea for him to make this move, and we'll see if he ultimately decides to do it. But I think that would be a very good pickup considering where we are at this transfer portal cycle. And you also want to get him in here as soon as possible so they can start working out with the team. As I understand it, and Connor Pay actually said, I believe on the podcast earlier this week, BYU summer workout period begins next week. So if you can get Isaiah Jatta signed, sealed, and delivered and get him on campus as soon as Monday, he can get in with his teammates, get working out, start working with guys like Connor Pay, and get understanding the offense and the playbook for BYU, and hopefully hit the ground running when it comes to August and training camp time. That is the ideal scenario. We'll see if it ultimately plays out that way, but I think this would be a very, very savvy pickup for BYU coming out of the transfer portal, and fingers crossed it comes off. that way. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we'll finish out today's podcast. I got a couple of questions lingering from a Q&A session I offered to our Locked On Cougars Insider group earlier this week, and also a monster upset for BYU softball yesterday at the Big 12 Championships. What a win for Gordon Eakin's squad. We'll talk about that as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monopoly Go. All right, game off for a moment here. We're going to pause and talk about Monopoly Go. I know you probably said, Jake, you talk about this all the time. Flag on the play. Just, you know what? I'm just going to say, got a lot of stuff to talk about, so bear with me for a moment here. The best part of Monopoly Go is you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you go work together to build up your boards. The more you work to win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. But also, there's much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with your friends to complete big albums for prizes. Hilarious emojis for when you want to turn heel and taunt your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. And also, you can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with as you play in Monopoly Go as well. The best part is it always feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton of them include unique mini games. You could be digging for treasure or playing on a robot pachinko machine. Plus, there's always timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies to benefit you in the long run. There's always something new to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Once again, it's available now. Monopoly Go on the Google Play or App Store. As I like to say, let's get back to it and game on. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to encourage you, if you've not done so already, please join our Locked On Cougars Insider group. It's a great way to interact with myself. A number of people over the years I've done this podcast. Jake, I'd love just to be able to chat with you back and forth. Well, you want to do that. It's our Locked On Cougars Insider group. It literally is able to have text conversations with myself. I can send you messages. They pop up in your text app, and you send them right back to me. And it's a really fun way to interact with the show. We're having a great time with our current subscribers. And if you guys want to join us, get a 14-day free trial. Then it's $5 a month afterwards. You can click the link in the show notes below and join us on our Locked On Cougars Insider group. And hope you guys will consider doing that. All right, a couple of notes before we go on today's show is congratulations, number 6 seed BYU women's softball got a huge win over nationally number 3 ranked Oklahoma State yesterday, 7-2, and now advances to the Big 12 semifinals today, where it doesn't get any easier. They, like I said, there's an easier idea with the overall ranking, but number 4 Oklahoma, who by the way is the multi-time defending national champion, they will take on the Sooners. Speaking of the Cougars today in that matchup, huge win for BYU. Now they face off against Oklahoma. That'll be at 5:00 Central Time. That's 4:00 Mountain Time. Big 12 now on ESPN Plus if you want to tune into it. Now, the biggest thing about this win for BYU over Oklahoma State, it very well, and Jay Drew pointed this out. I'll agree with him, and I pay attention a lot more to BYU softball than most because my wife was an alumnus of BYU softball. That win may have gotten BYU into the NCAA tournament. Their RPI rating was in the 50s. Traditionally, you need to be in the 40s if you want to get an at-large bid, and that win over Oklahoma State is going to boost BYU's RPI. You want to all but clinch your NCAA tournament berth? Go and upset Oklahoma tonight and then punch your ticket to the Big 12 championship game, ostensibly against Texas tomorrow on Saturday. This is a really, really impressive win for Gordon Eakin's squad. They have struggled with pitching issues all season long, but congratulations to them on a monster win. And hopefully they can shock the world once again by taking down the Oklahoma Sooners out there in Oklahoma City. All right, a couple of questions I wanted to answer as well from our Locked On Cougars Insider group before we go here. Laramie asked this question earlier this week. He said, Jake, when do you think BYU will do an overhaul to LaVell Edwards Stadium? Laramie, in my heart of hearts, I think it's years away because BYU, and I think most of you probably understand this. If you don't, let me school you to the game a little bit. BYU, when it comes to building buildings or renovating them, they have to have what they call an endowment fund for those. So in essence, remember the SAB, the student athlete building where BYU football is headquartered down there on the lower part of campus. When that building was built, it had an endowment fund associated with it, and it still does to this day, that takes care of the upkeep in perpetuity for that building. Every building on Brigham Young University's campus has one of these endowment funds. You have to have that, in theory, boosted to get, I think, a facelift or an overhaul to LaVell Edwards Stadium. Is it needed? 100%. Folks, LaVell Edwards Stadium's first footings were poured the year my father was born. That's in the 1960s. BYU has done a marvelous job, frankly, of keeping LaVell Edwards Stadium as current as they can. But at some point, there is going to come a point that BYU is going to have to upgrade it. And I hope that they start. I talked a little earlier about having to absorb potentially $30 million in a budget addition. you know what? You may want to sock away some extra funds and start soliciting funds for an overhaul, if not an overall reconstruction of LaVell Edwards Stadium. Now, let me insert one little tidbit about this, though, that a certain somebody I know that I talked to that I trust mentioned this to me. He said, Jake, here's the big way. Here's the big, easy way to get a new stadium for BYU football. You make it a dome. You have it essentially. You follow the model of like Arizona and Las Vegas, like stadiums where they have the grass that on the rollers. It can roll out into the parking lot. It grows in the sun, and they roll it in for the games. Essentially, you go to the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you tell them, "Hey, we'd like to build a new stadium on BYU's campus, but if you put a dome on it, it becomes an enclosed building." And as most of you know, I already mentioned the fact that BYU's buildings on campus have endowments. Well, also, every building but one on BYU's campus, so far as I am aware, have a dual purpose. They are church buildings in addition to serving their other purposes, whether they are classrooms, laboratories, sporting events. Like the Marriott Center is considered by the LDS Church to be a church building on campus. You picked up what I'm putting down here? You declare the future LaVell Edwards Stadium to be the new regional conference center for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Provo, Utah. And oh, by the way, on the weekends in the fall, there happen to be 60, 70,000 people in this brand new state-of-the-art iconic dome in Provo, Utah that was funded by the LDS Church that paid $2 to $3 billion, and it was a relative drop in the bucket if you believe some of the reports of BYU, not BYU's. If you believe the LDS, if you believe what the pools of money the LDS Church has in reserve, that's the way to do it. I'm not saying it's reality. I'm just saying that's the way to approach it if you're BYU and have the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to as I've been instructed to refer to it, to have them pay for it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that in theory is the way to make it happen if you want to build a shiny new edifice for BYU football in the future. It's just one idea. So take that under advisement. All right. One other question before we go on today's show. Riker Wright asked this: should we be more excited for football season? Riker, in just a one-word answer: yes. I love football season. I love the fact that BYU basketball has been absolutely dominating the headlines recently. I'm totally for it. I love the fact that Kevin Young has brought a lot of energy to this program. Big ups to Mark Pope for what he did year one in the Big 12. And the headlines continue to roll. Kaba Keita coming in, Chris Burgess. A lot of good things happening for BYU basketball. But those of you who have been longtime everydayer listeners of this podcast know that my heart lies with college football. It will forever. I will forever be a college football first guy. Be more excited for football season. I don't know what to expect from BYU football. A lot of people hit me up and say, Jake, what do you expect from these guys? And I'll be frank, I don't know what to expect, but I love college football. It is my pride and joy. It is my favorite sport. I love the NFL. I love NBA basketball, but my pride and joy, my number one sport by far, is college football. So yes, we should be more excited for football season. Now, if you're speaking the BYU sense and you're hoping for them to be a Big 12 contender in the near future, maybe that's not necessarily the excitement factor you're looking for. Maybe that's not going to give you that excitement. But enjoy the fact. Remember, BYU went independent, folks, with the whole idea of getting to where they're at today in the Big 12 conference. They're living this dream. They're living the dream that all of us would have given everything to have back in 2010, 2011, 13, 14, all the way down until BYU finally got that announcement that they were going to the Big 12 conference. Let's be excited that BYU's at this level. We all knew it was going to take an adjustment. I know last season losing out the final 5 games of the season left a bitter taste in BYU fans' mouths. I get that, but be excited. Football season, it is my absolute love. But the best part is the Big 12 overall, it's been a dream come true. So let's just celebrate that, and let's not get too uptight about maybe some of the day-to-day machinations as well. So maybe it answers your question, Riker. Maybe it doesn't. But yes, be excited for football season. I am super excited for football season. I cannot believe we're already to May. I don't usually like to wish away the summer, but there are times I'm like, you know what? June, July, get out of the way. I want to get to training camp. I want to get to the football season, and it's going to be here before too long. And I, for one, cannot wait. All right, that'll do it for today's show. Big thank you. And by the way, they'll do it for the week as well, unless something crazy happens over the weekend. But thank you for all of your support. Hope you guys are all doing well out there in Cougar Nation. A big thank you to all of you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Obviously, big thank you to all of you who are everydayers as well, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I want to hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. Wishing you guys a fantastic weekend. Back with you guys again on Monday, right here on Locked On Cougars.